I'm here with Sean McNeely. Hello, Sean.
Good morning, Bill.
Let's see. We'll,
How
we'll
are you
bring him up.
today?
I am awake and ready to talk about fogging. So how's it going over where you are?
I like being on the East Coast or East side of the United States because now it's 11 o'clock for me. So I'm awake, I'm alert. I've been already in the lizard room playing around, messing with my fogger. So life is good. It's been kind of a crazy week because kids were out of school, so we didn't get up at the same time. And we're doing this instead. We did a Wednesday, but this is like our Wednesday evenings, and now we're doing a Saturday morning. So
Uh-huh.
life was a little bit confusing for me today, but I think I'll manage it.
Okay. All right. Well, as everybody knows, we are going to be talking about fogging, and this is a live stream. And so if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put it into the chat. And after the presentation, we'll get to the questions. So sit back and enjoy talking about fogging. Sean, we're going to be talking about fogging today. And I am wondering, big drum roll, why do we fog?
Why do we fog? It's part of making sure we keep the chameleons hydrated. It's also a kind of a naturalistic phenomenon. In the countries where they're at, it's awful hot, it's awful muggy, and as it cools down, fog is created. So we do that to replicate the situation. I also do it to increase my humidity, and to make sure that when the chameleons are breathing in and out, that if there's more humidity on the outside, and the compared to how it is on the inside, it doesn't allow them to lose moisture. So they're actually gaining potentially, or at least staying even, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, fogging is part of our entire regimen of hydration. And so
Mhm.
Sean, let's review some of our hydration options that we have in captivity.
So just like we replicate the sun with different things, we replicate Mother Nature with misting, dripping, fogging, and feeders. Misters can come from all different types of, from the tiny little, really fine misters to just almost all the way over to dripping. Dripping kind of is like when your misters are almost turning off. Obviously, we do it differently by having a container. We put a hole in it, whether it's a professional one or something we just did ourselves, and we let them to drip. Fogging is another opportunity. It increases the humidity, but it also allows dew to form. If you fog enough, you get a little bit of raindrops kind of after you're fogging. At least I do in the morning. This morning I came in and most of my cages had a little bit of dewdrop from the foggers, and when the misters turned on, it helped it out. And then finally, feeders. How else? Chameleons don't drink like we do, so they get it through their food. We put vegetables into our crickets, and we put water into our crickets, and the crickets are or dubia or silkworms or what have you, and they're full of moisture and they help the hydration.
Yeah, and I think it's important. We usually don't think about the feeders as a hydration source, but that's exactly what they are. So,
Yeah, I even forgot when I was listing it out originally, but then when we were talking just a couple days ago, when you want to try to hydrate a dehydrated chameleon, a silkworm or a hornworm are great to do that with. So
yeah.
food is very important with that.
Now, when we start getting into water and hydration, there are different types of water. And have you found that there's any difference in your application?
Not really. I think that people put a lot of thought into it. I would say probably the only thing I would avoid is if you have well water that's really hard or bad or in some way, shape, or form, that you're doing something with it before you drink it. You need to do the same thing for your animals. You can use tap water, you can use distilled water. The problem with distilled water is it has no minerals in it. So if you used only distilled water and it didn't land on the plants and in the cage, it would be pure water, and that could be dangerous. But the chameleons are not going to stick their mouth on the watering source and just get pure water. So it's all academic as to what we use or don't use. Personally, I use RO water and tap water. I do let my tap water sit out for 24 hours. I just pour it into a 1 gallon bucket and I leave it out overnight, just to make sure the chlorine content goes down a little bit. But most people say if you've got a little bit of chlorine in there and you can live in it, it doesn't hurt the chameleons or most lizards.
Okay. Now, a big consideration when you're using water is the hardness of the water, the
Mhm.
number of dissolved minerals, and that's what's going to give you that white chalky residue on your cage, on the front of your cage, on the leaves. And
Mhm.
so, if you have that the hard water, like I do here in California, I use uh, heavily filtered water in all of mine. But you see some of my photos on my Instagram in the background, like for my outdoor chameleons, the very chalky leaves, and it's not dangerous for the chameleon. It just
Mhm.
it's just aesthetically rather at not be. But oh well.
And it can kill your Mist King nozzles or what have you,
Oh yeah.
your nozzles. It can, over time, it gets cluttered on them just like it would on your shower head. So, I mean, if you're seeing it on your shower head, you're probably seeing it on your misting nozzles. You're probably seeing it in your cages. Getting an RO system, which is really relatively inexpensive, takes out all those minerals or a good amount of them and leaves you with something easier to use. And it's good for you as well to have not so many minerals in your water.
Okay. Well, let's talk about briefly talk about the sizes of chameleon. So, if we want to fog, we're generally talking about fogging adult chameleons, but are there special considerations that you use when fogging smaller or baby chameleons?
Sure, I fog all my chameleons, but when I fog my baby chameleons, I fog them out of tiny little holes. So when I'm thinking of a 3/4 inch pipe for most of my chameleons that I'm fogging with, I'm using a 1/4 inch drill hole. So I'm using the same pipe for 12 cages with 1/4 inch drill holes, and a tiny little stream of fog goes into each of those containers, and I'm fogging 12 cages instead of two. With the same machine. So I'm doing, 6 times as much area, and I actually find that I sometimes don't have to miss my baby cages because enough fog kind of causes dewdrops, and I don't have to get so aggressive with misting in the morning. But you've got to be careful not to blow away your chameleons with the fog, because at some point, like anything else, like UVB, like heat, like sunlight, it becomes too much. And it can cause respiratory problems. It can drown your chameleon if you do way too much water. So you gotta make sense and use good moderation.
All right, and I want to add in just general high level tips on fogging. Fogging is a little bit uh, interesting in the way that on my chameleon canopy care summaries, you see that the humidity is between 80 and 100%. And the thing is, you can over fog. And the problem is, you don't go beyond 100% on your gauges. And so, what we had a problem with people that they would just fill their cage with fog and just pump fog, fog, fog into that cage, and it became too much. But they would look at the gauge and say, hey, 100%, two thumbs up. So, we need to be smart about this. And if you're asking, well, how do I be smart about it? Don't overdo it. And how do you not overdo it? Go outside on a foggy night, and that's what you're looking for. And I know that's not really specific. So, we're still working on this in the industry, in the community. I'm still working on trying to how to communicate this effectively. So that's part of our growth here. But Sean, do you have anything you can add to that?
One thing I found, as I built my basement up with more and more cages and more foggers, one day, I fog from 11 or midnight to 7 a.m. And I fog intermittently sometimes, and I was fogging all night. And one time I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I went downstairs because I heard a clench or something. And my room was actually raining. It was like there was so much fog, I was getting rain on the ground and what have you. And I was like, oh my. But because we do these things when we're not always physically there, make sure you take a look at what you're doing.
Uh-huh.
That's my 2 cents, is make sure, because then I knew I could turn them off. I went to fogging an hour at a time. I went to fogging for shorter periods of time. And I fog different times at different times of the day, different amounts at different times of the year. When it's spring and fall, I get a lot more humidity in my basement, so I don't have to fog as much. When it's winter, I got to fog a whole lot because I've got a air conditioner running, pulling the water out of the air. And when it's summer, or when it's winter, yes, I get to do that. I got the heater doing that. Got it backwards. And in the summer, I got the air conditioner pulling the water out of the air. So I'm doing, both the summer and the winter. I'm doing a lot more fogging. In the spring and the fall, I don't need to fog nearly as much.
Yeah, and fogging is just a tool to get to help us with our hydration over a 24-hour period. And you need to look at fogging as part of the whole strategy. And what I mean by this is we want a high humidity night and then a low dry, the surfaces to dry out during the day. And this is so the fungus, the mold, the bacteria doesn't have a chance to grow. We're always in this fight between we want it humid for the chameleon, but we don't want to grow the nasty stuff that will be detrimental to the chameleon's health. And so that is why we fog when it's cool and we try to dry it down when it's hot. And that way we give the chameleon the hydration it needs without giving all of this nasty stuff a chance to take foot and grow. And so I want to specifically mention that because we're about to go into a DIY fogger that is going to be a lot more, that's going to produce a whole lot more fog than you're used to. And so you need to be smart about with great power comes great responsibility. And we're about to give you some great power. So,
Yeah.
John.
I noticed that I need to use fans sometimes. Air movement is awesome. It makes a big difference. I noticed that sometimes I have to actually use dehumidifiers in my basement. So I'll be running a humidifier in the winter and a dehumidifier in the summer, just to make it what it needs to be. I like to see get below 50% by like 1 p.m. I just like to just kind of get, and it doesn't have to be exact numbers, but I like to see it drop, and I'd like to see the cages dry out, and I'd like to see that, it doesn't look soaking wet. My floor doesn't look wet. Nothing looks damp. It feels like a normal room, and it feels comfortable to me at that time. At midnight, 1, 2 o'clock, it's a little bit foggy in there, just like a foggy night, like you said, but not like it was when it was raining. And I couldn't believe it literally was raining off my ceiling. That was the first time I added a bunch of cages. I didn't know how much fogging I could do. I didn't know how long it would fog. And you don't realize how much fog actually is created. You look a little while, a little bit of fog. 3 hours later, that fog kind of builds up in your entire room. And depending on how many foggers you have and how much you got running. And like you said, we're about to talk about some serious fogging ability. And you just have to keep an eye on it. I think we're going to talk about it again later. But when you automate things, you have to make sure that when they're running, you know what's happening. You may be sleeping like I am most of these times, but you need to know what it is. So just turn it on from time to time. Check it out. Keep an eye on it.
Yeah. And once again, we need to keep perspective. Fogging is a tool to give you the humidity you need. And so you use that only if you need that extra humidity. Me in California, I have very dry seasons. And so I could be fogging all night just to try to get to a reasonable humidity level at night. If you live in the deep south and your windows are open and you've got 100% humidity and there's nothing you can do, you got you got dehumidifiers running, then you don't need to add fogging. You don't need to add fogging when you've already got the humidity. So remember, this is a tool. Chameleons don't need fog. They need humidity. Fogging is just a tool to get the humidity that you don't have. If you have the humidity, you don't have to add the fogging. So let's keep that perspective.
And someone asked about mold and mildew. If you're getting mold and mildew, you're fogging much too. You've got much humidity, and you need to get it down sometime during the day. Mold and mildew won't grow if you get down below 50% every day. It'd be very rare.
All right, so let's talk about cage types with the fogging and how fogging is related to how humidity is related to fogging and the cage type.
Yeah, so this goes to a lesson I learned. When I first started fogging, I actually had a chameleon in a glass cage, and I didn't know anything. It was many years ago, and I fogged on one night, and I came in the next day, and it was just like my basement that one time. It was full of
Mhm.
water. There was 2 inches of water on the bottom of the glass container. A container that is got solid sides is going to contain a whole lot more fog. If you've got screen sides, you have to fog the entire room in order to get it done. So there's screen where things are pretty much your ambient temperature, your ambient fog and humidity. There's these hybrids, which I personally like, where you have multiple sides, usually the back, the bottom, the sides, and some part of the front are solid. And then there's completely solid, which really aren't. They're the glass cages. And if you get the right ones, and although they don't make them very many of them the right size for the bigger chameleons, they have humidity, not humidity, the ability to have airflow in them so you can get the chimney effect, which is you heat from the top and the air is pulled in from below like a chimney would be. But the more open your cage is, the more fog you're going to need to actually create anything, unless your chameleon sits right under the fogger. Now, I've noticed that they do that, which is, I guess, okay, but it'd be better if it was kind of uniform. So they do. We want them to have options, but we don't want them to have to sit exactly where the fogger is that day to get it done.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I have no idea how they find the fog stream, especially since they go to sleep. The fog starts later, and the fog goes off before they wake up. But sooner or later, they will start sleeping under the fog stream. And you have a fog stream, especially if you have a screen cage, because the fog comes in and you've got this cone of fog coming from it that dissipates, just a couple inches away from it, and it's gone because screen cages are horrible for holding in fog. And so you've got this little column of fog. Uh, the more preferable way is to have a hybrid cage that has those solid sides, and so the fog is collected and dispersed. But you also have to realize it is collected. So you got to make sure that you have that ventilation and that airflow. All right, Shaw, let's talk about what our commercial fogging options are.
So you have something like a Pet Pioneer, which is commercially made to fog. It's a reptile fogger. It comes with pipes that come out of it that can be connected to a 3/4 inch pipe or other pipe, and it usually has a divider. You can go to a couple cages. My next step in line was to get a ultrasonic humidifier, a cool mist humidifier. You can get them from Amazon or whatever. Actually, the Amazon Basic is one of them up there. And you remove the top piece. You put a 3/4 inch pipe in, or whatever pieces of pipe. The one on the I'm looking at this here, sorry, at the picture. But you remove the piece, and you might have to adapt it down to 3/4. I like 3/4 inch pipe. You can run it. I started off with having one pipe to one humidifier for cage, and then I realized you could go to, I turned them off, and I realized I didn't have to run it half the night. So I went to double cages, and I've gone up to 6 cages where I've humidified from one of those. You do have to turn it on full blast and have all 6 cages have a not little holes, but an opening, and you kind of make the pipes about the same length so they get the same in each one. But those are the commercially available ones. They're relatively inexpensive. 3/4 inch pipe is available at your local hardware store. You just cut it down to the right size. You don't have to glue it or do anything special. And I like it because you pull it apart. And I like them because you can see that it's working. Because the next morning when I come in, the fogger has less water in it. And the cage, you should be able to look at your cage and tell. But as a whole, you want to be able to kind of see the fogger has less water in it. I've gotten to the point where I put enough in to do 2 days, and because I know that I'm going to pull, I usually fog from the front. I know most people fog from the top. It's a little more challenging to build it. I fog from the front, and I can pull it off and feed everybody. I feed my adults every other day, so I take out the pipe, I fill the commercial ultrasound machine, and I feed them. I put the pipe back in later in the day, because that way the pipe has the time to dry out and do what needs to be done. But when you start to get up there in cages, I've got walls of cages that have 14 cages on them. You've got, even if I'm doing double cages, you still got 7 pipes on each side. You got to fill up 7 humidifiers. it gets to be quite a pain. So that's why I moved to the
Mhm.
next option.
All right. So, well, why don't we just come right out and say, if that's working so well, why make our own fogger?
I think the biggest thing for me is it's a single reservoir. So I fill out one reservoir, and actually, what I'm doing is I'm turning on the RO thing, letting it fill up with, I've got a 27-gallon reservoir. I let it fill up, and I don't have to actually take these individual containers to the sink, fill them up, put the plug back in them, put them back in the thing, make sure I set them correctly. Because if you don't
Mhm.
set them correctly, the water doesn't come out. The water doesn't come out. It stops humidifying the minute it gets started, and you don't get any fogging done. And since you're not actually probably down there at 11 o'clock or midnight when it starts fogging, you don't even know it's not working till the next morning when you see it. So having a single reservoir is easy. It makes it, you can see that it's actually going down relatively quickly. I do have a float on mine, which allows it to fill up to the amount that I ask it to. But I noticed a couple days ago that it seemed like my room was really dry. And I think it was Easter. One of the kids from my family, it was over there, must have pushed a button and turned off my ultrasonic humidifier. And so for a couple days, I wasn't actually fogging, even though I thought I was
Hmm.
fogging, because I didn't have the ability to look at the reservoir and say, "Oh, it's going down," because it was supposedly filling up on its own. So once again, I think we have we're going to talk about a little bit, but there's problems with automation. If you automate things and you assume that it's working, the reason I figured it out was because eventually it just got dry in my basement. I'm like, this is way too
Hmm.
dry for a chameleon basement. But and I started searching and I turned it on with my timer and it didn't go on. I'm like, why is it not on? And I realized it wasn't actually fogging. The wind, the fan was blowing, which is a double whammy. I'm blowing air into my cages without any water. So it became really a bit of a problem there. But anyways, to do it with a single fogger, it's less work. I don't have to move the pipes. My pipes actually come in from the ceiling and land on top. I can open my cages anytime I want without removing the pipes. I don't have to do other things. So it makes life a lot better.
All right. Well, what are our options if we want to make our own fogger?
I think there's a lot of options out there, but really what you need to do is you need to have something with water in it. You need to create fog and you need to send the fog somewhere. So I went to the House of Hydro. They have excellent ultrasonic foggers. They do this for reptiles, but they also do it for hydroponics. It's probably their biggest group of people that's buying from, at least based on what their website shows. I don't know what their statistics are, what have you. You need to blow that somewhere, you need to distribute it somewhere and go from there. So there are some commercial things out there. Swamp coolers do this kind of thing, but that's blowing it everywhere and not blowing into individual cages. And that, that's going to cause a whole lot more humidity in your room, and that's probably going to end you up with the mildew and mold as well. So best idea is to build your own, and we can talk about how to build your own.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and start that. What are the pieces that we need?
So you need somewhere to put the water. So a bin. I got 27-gallon bins from Home Depot. They were clear. I like clear because, like I said, I like to see the water go down. I like to see what's happening on the inside. It has a solid top. Um, I put, then you need a way to get water to it. I've got an RO system, which reverse osmosis, which, like we said, gets the minerals out of the water and a pipe to it. I have a valve that allows me to turn it on and off so I can either fill it or not fill it. I actually have a float which turns it off when it gets to a certain height because I don't want it to go above a certain height because you have to have there's water on the bottom and fog on the top, and then you blow the fog out. You have to be below a certain area because if the water is in the way of the fog, you can't blow the fog. You're blowing water; it doesn't work. Um, but like I said, I don't leave it on to just be the float anymore because I like to see the water go down. I probably fogging 14 cages. I use a gallon or two a night. So 27 gallons doesn't go anywhere near going down, but I got it much larger just in case. And I'm actually probably by the end of today, I'll be up to 28 cages. I've got most of the duct work done, but I digress. So you need
Okay.
something to make the fog. You've got the water. You need something to make the fog. I got an ultrasonic fogger. I got the 12 XL just because it's the biggest one you could get because I didn't have any idea what I'd need. I mean, they tell you how much it'll do, but you don't know you're blowing it through. Instead of blowing through a room, you're blowing it through pipe. So I got the 12XL, and I got a
What do you mean by XL, 12XL?
it has 12 discs. These discs create the fog. So it's got 12 discs. XL is just the shape of it. The regular 12 is a circle. This one's more of like a bar. I don't know why the bar works better, but the 6 that's in a circle doesn't work as well as the 6 that's in a bar. So it's kind of interesting that way. But what it does is you turn it on, and electricity creates the disc creates ultrasonic fog.
Okay. And so the more discs, the more fog we're going to get out, correct?
Right, exactly. So then I have a fog controller so I can control my fogger and set it what I want it to, how much fog I want it to make. So it can operate like a 1 disker, or it can operate like a 12 disker, just based on the setting there. It doesn't turn off the individual disk, it just slows down the amount of power to it. The next
Okay.
thing is you've got the water in the container, you've made the fog. Now you got to get the fog somewhere. So because it's not like these commercial smaller ones, and it just kind of goes up via gravity and being blown up, you need a fan. You get a waterproof fan, you put the fan on there, the fan blows into the container, and it blows it somewhere. So then the next step is it's got to go somewhere. So you need an air duct, which is a hole. It's a piece that fits on flat on the bottom and has a circle cylinder area that you can put a pipe in. Then you put piping. I use PVC pipe. I started with 4-inch pipe. I went down to 2-inch pipe, and then I went down to 3/4 inch pipe. Why did I do it? Realistically, one, I know that you don't want to do the whole thing in 4-inch pipe because it'd be a ton of wasted to get to there. But two, because the parts were available at Home Depot. It's easier to go from 4 to 2. It's easier to go to from, and the smallest I could go from 2 was down to 3/4. So that I went 4 to 2, and then I teed off, and I went 2 all the way along the wall, and along the 2-inch ones, I put a T to each every other cage with 3/4 inch. I divided that by the 2 cages. So if you're looking at it, you see a 4-inch pipe that goes left and right, and it goes along each wall. It becomes a 2-inch pipe midway there. It becomes along the walls is a 2-inch pipe, and every 4 feet on the 2-inch pipes is a 3/4 inch T that tees off to 2 cages. So that goes
Okay.
into the cages, and the 3/4 inch pipe goes right to the cages. So it's all above. And I just tried to put it where I always put my, for some reason, I always put my misters right next to each other, because when I open the cages, it makes it easier to, because my cages open opposite direction next to each other, it makes it easier to have the food in the middle and the misters on the other side, so I'm not missing my food. So I just
Mm-hmm.
happened to do the same thing. Kind of a strange phenomenon, one of those OCD things that I got, but I do it that way. So every 4 feet there's 2 openings, and then in the end it's capped. And that's the way it works. So you turn it on, it starts fogging, the fan blows the fog up through the pipes, it circulates through all the pipes and comes out the holes. Because the holes are smaller than the pipes, it comes out a little bit of a stream, but it's no faster than the other ones. And what I did is I watched it for a while, I let it get started, and I turned the fogger down to about the same fog rate that I was getting from those individual or two cage foggers.
Okay. And then somehow we need to control this. How much power does this draw, and what kind of timer would we need?
Just normal appliance timers seem to do well. It doesn't seem to draw a ton of power, no more than a basic light or what have you. There's two things drawing power. You've got the fan drawing power, and you've got the ultrasonic humidifier. Both of those are on switches so that I can control how much fan I'm using, and I can control how much humidity fogging. So I know how much fog I'm creating, and I'm also able to control the amount of blowing that I get done. At some point, I also will be blowing through after they're done to kind of dry out my system. So I let the fogger go on for a while, and then I turn off the fogger and I let the fan blow for a little bit longer to kind of dry out my system so I don't get any mold or mildew in there. So I have those on timers. Timers, it's important that you get a timer that you can set as many times as you want. I can set it up to the minutes. I have one that I got, it was like $10 at Amazon that essentially has 10 different periods of time that I can set within seconds. I could even have it on for a second, or I could have it on for the whole day, and it turns on and turns off each of those times. And the nice thing about it is it's battery backup. So if the power turns off, it won't run, but it won't forget. So if the power turns on an
Okay.
hour
Yep.
later, it's still running. So if 3 o'clock in the morning, the power turns off and I'm sleeping and I don't know it, and 4 o'clock it turns back on, everything turns back on the way it's supposed to and continues as if it had not done gone off. Those are inexpensive, easy to find, and great. I mean, it'd be awesome if I had one that actually ran it, a backup generator and what have you. I don't have one of those yet. Someday soon, but nonetheless, at least it remembers and you don't have to reset it every time. I think that's much better. The one I got has, I think, 8 or 9 settings. I usually run my fogging from 11 to 1, 3 to 5, or 11 to 1, 2 to 4, and 5 to 7. Why I decided that, it was just out of craziness. When I'm, and when it's worse and I need more humidity, I run it all night. When it's less, I cut out the middle one. So, or I reduce it down to hours. I think it's a little hit or miss. It's kind of a guessing game. You kind of try to figure out what will work, what you need, see how much it is, and you turn it on and turn it off. You could do it at minutes at a time. Some people run it 30 minutes. Some people do it other ways. I just found it easier to run it an hour or two at a time and turn it off and run an hour or two at a time. It seemed to be best for what my system was doing.
Yeah, I like to use simple appliance timers that give me
Mhm.
15-minute increments, and I will do it half hour on, maybe, and then half hour off, half hour on, because in a hybrid cage, the fog sticks around for a while, and so
Mhm.
what I do is I see how long the fog is sticking around, and that's going to depend upon the ambient humidity. If it's very dry, sometimes I get down into the single digits, well, then the fog dissipates a whole lot quicker, even though it is in a hybrid cage. And during the times where it's raining, things are very humid, then I don't fog as much and I only give little bursts of fog because that's all I need. So, we, anytime you see a care summary that has any direction about how much you should fog, that's just to start you off. You need to adapt it to your situation, and your situation will change with the season. So, this is something where we need to be mentally aware of what's going on. Chameleon husbandry isn't a black and white, set it up and it's done. Everything changes all the time. So, you need to understand why we're fogging and adjust for your situation.
Yeah, here in Ohio, spring and fall right now, today it's 78 degrees, maybe up to 81. Yesterday it was 55 degrees. The day before was 34 as a high. So, I'm almost ready to turn on my air conditioner today, and I had the heat on the last 2 days. So life is totally different. How much humidity I need, how much I'm fogging, whether I need a mist extra, those are all things that happen day to day for me. So it's very important to keep an eye on things.
Yeah, and also don't look at your weather app to figure out what the humidity is. If you are in a house and you're running central air or a heater, you're sucking humidity out of the air. So, I the way I gauge it is how long does it take for my fog to dissipate in the particular cage that I'm using. So,
And I have humidity uh, and temperature gauges in a bunch of cages. I don't put them in every cage. I would go crazy trying to chase my tail, but just to get an idea of what's going on. And I take a peek at it. I've got a dashboard that tells me, what kind of humidity is it. I look to see that they're all in the 50s at midday, and I look to see that they're all way up there in the high 80, 90s at night, and I start to feel good about it. But like you said, they're and like I said before, you just feel it. You're in the room and you feel there's something wrong. It's too dry in here. It's too wet in here. The cages look too wet. The chameleons are behaving strangely. I found out that one of my misters wasn't working on a chameleon because I took a look at her and she just didn't look right. And I turned my misting system on because she looked just dehydrated. I misted her and she came over and started drinking. And I'm like, that's not right. That's not supposed to happen. So I turned my misting system on and all my misters but that one worked. So it was
mhm.
clogged. And so had I not paid attention to her behavior, I would have thought, hey, my misters are working. I've got 20 misters heads on that misting thing. Why isn't it working right? And she just wasn't getting the water that she needed. She turned around immediately as soon as I gave her some fluid, went, got something to eat, and she's doing fine. But you just got to keep your eye and wits about you about these things.
Okay. And I want to address, we actually have a comment in the chat about bacterial growth inside the fogger system and causing lung infections. Everything that we do here has the potential to add benefit to our system. And if we don't do it right, it's going to add disease and kill our animals. It's the same with basking bulbs, UVB. And so it's important that we keep a clean system for our fogger because we don't want to get bacterial buildup. We don't want to aerosolize bacteria or whatever else. Actually, I don't know what the ultrasonic disc does to bacteria or viruses or whatnot, but we do have to be careful about what we send into the air that our chameleons are going to be breathing. Now, I've heard a number of a wide range of opinions on the internet about whether from fogging is life-giving to fogging is a way to kill your chameleon. And one thing that's important when we hear this wide variety of opinions, I mean, obviously I fog, I've been fogging for years and my animals aren't dying. In fact, it's added to their health. My animals that get the fog are doing much better than before. So I'm a fogging success story, whereas other people are talking about how fogging will kill your animal. And I think we need to look at this not as a black and white, okay, we've got two differences of opinion. This is an opinion. People have different experiences, and it's our job in the community to figure out what's different between those experiences. Is it the different way that the fogging is used? Is it a different way, the different environments that the fogging is used? And before we can say fogging is useful or fogging isn't, well, let me say, instead of saying fogging is great or fogging is dangerous, we need to figure out the situations where fogging is appropriate and the situations where fogging could be detrimental to health. Is it the cleanliness of the equipment? Is it the application and when it is with respect to the environmental conditions that are already there? And it's by understanding the truth in every one of these experiences and understanding why they had those different experiences, we can truly understand a parameter like fogging or anything else that we're doing in chameleon husbandry. So today we're going to be talking about the tool of fogging and the discussion about when it's appropriate, how it's appropriate, and how to make sure it's of maximum benefit and the minimum of danger. That will be an ongoing conversation.
I think, Bill, it's important to say that it took me 25 independent foggers to decide to get to the big one. I mean, the reason I was worried about that was because I wanted to be sure that I could dry it out. It wouldn't cause problems. I could make sure it was working. I would take out the pipes. I'd let the pipes dry out. I made sure everything. And when I got to the point where it was just, I was spending an hour or two every other day filling up all my foggers alone. Just that's all I was doing. When I spend 3 minutes turning on and turning off the button today, you just have to keep your wits about you. I forgot one part that I just added extra today was I've got a sump pump in my basin, which moves the water around. Just like in a fish tank, you've got a pump. I got a pump that's moving the water around and keeping the water fresh, like it would a fish tank. I'm going to allow my sump to go down to nothing from time to time. I didn't glue my equipment together so that I can take every piece apart and bleach it if I want, or clean it if I want, or dry it out. I'm going to probably be adding a central fan on the 4-inch pipe that will work later on to blow a significantly greater amount of air into my cages. One of the things it's not part of this necessarily, but this discussion, but is airflow is important to chameleons. And I'm using fans and ceiling fans and things. Why can't I just blow air through my pipes? And so that'll dry out my pipes, reduce the likelihood of them getting mold, mildew, bacteria. And so I just have to figure out what size fan, what type of fan that's not going to cause problems with the water, and blow air into my cages. But I'm going to do a little bit of experimenting here and there and do those type of things. We have to use our tools in a way that makes sense. Heat will kill a chameleon, cold will kill a chameleon, water will kill a chameleon, sun will kill a chameleon. Um, eh, you know, Ice could kill a chameleon, but also if you used it as a dripper and you put an ice cube on top of it and they were dehydrated, they would drip in, they drink it, and maybe be a little cold, but they go better. Everything can kill and everything could do well. You have to do it in moderation. You have to keep your wits about you. You have to think about what you're doing. And like few people commented, automation is just to make things easier. It doesn't withdraw the responsibility of making sure everything's working well. You've said it a bunch of times in your podcast. You have to look at the chameleon. They're individuals. You have to treat them individually. You have to take the time to look at them. If I know I'm getting too many reptiles or too many chameleons when I start to feel like I can't look at all of them individually and know that they're okay. And that's the time when you say, "Uh-oh, I need to either sell some of mine off, reduce what I'm doing, reduce the number of projects I'm working on, stop breeding temporarily." During the pandemic at one point, I just stopped breeding for 3 months because I knew that the babies I was getting were too high. There wasn't a good way to get rid of them. There wasn't enough movement going on. I needed to reduce and so I'm hurting a little bit now because I don't have as many bred as I would have back then because of that time ago, because it takes a year or more to do that. But you have to keep your wits about you. It's not really the topic of today's discussion, but it's important.
Well, let's get to how in the world. Let's go through the assembly process. How do
Sure.
you do
Okay.
this?
So you take the bin and you cut 2 holes in it. You take the fan and the outlet, and you figure out how big the fan and the outlet are. I took a drill. I drilled a hole. I took a pair of tin snips and I cut out the hole to be the right size. I took silicone, the same silicone you use in an aquarium, but plain silicone from Home Depot is the same stuff as they use in an aquarium. It just costs half as much, as long as you don't get any anti-mold or mildew stuff in it. Glued it on, screwed it together. So then I had a basin with a top on it that had 2 holes, one of them with the fan on it, screwed onto it, another one with just an outlet. I put the basin, opened the basin, I drilled a hole, and I put the same type of, what do they call those? The ports that you use to get the water in and out. There's a name, an outlet. And I drilled that for a 1/4 inch tubing. My daughter's voicing a little bit in the background, and so is the dog. So everybody's talking today. I drilled the hole for that. I drilled one for float. I screwed the float into that, and I put the tubing into my RO system. I did the quick connect 1/4 inch tube, same stuff you use for the Miss Kings. In fact, it was Miss King tubing that I used. And so then I dropped my the ultrasonic humidifier has a float that it sits in. You drop it in the float, you pull the cord through, and you hook that up to a timer. Actually, hook it up to the controller, and then you hook that controller up to a timer. The other thing you need to do is you hook the fan up to a controller, and you hook the fan up to a timer. And then now what you have is you have a machine that's blowing humidity out of a 4-inch hole. So now you got to go from the machine, and you got to decide where you need to put it. I tried to locate it centrally in my room. I tried to locate it in the middle of 2 of my rows so that they would go the most distance, the least distance to every cage. I took the 4-inch pipe and went up to the ceiling. I split it in half to both sides, and then I went down to 2-inch pipe. I teed that off on either side, so I ran down the left and the right side with the 2-inch pipe, and every 4 foot I put a outlet. I connected those outlets together with 3/4 inch pipe to tee into 2 cages with the 3/4 inch on a 45-degree angle and a 90 that made them go into the cages. And then I turned it on and hoped and prayed that it would go where it needed to go. And I saw that and I tuned it up to I got enough fog was being made that the fogger wasn't losing fog and it still continuously had fog. And then I turned the fan up to the point where I needed it to go to get just enough fog into each cage, watched it for a few hours, turned it off, set the timers, and went to bed and hoped that it worked that night.
All right. Well, I am going to start asking some questions and get some details.
Sure.
Going back to the beginning, when you
Mhm.
selected a bin, now it's my understanding that this bin needs to be airtight. How important is that?
Reasonably airtight, yes, because if it's not airtight, you're going to blow humidity out the sides of it or what have you. So it's not a Loctite bin. It's a bin that I just want a storage bin that I got at Home Depot. It does have a little bit of waste from it, but it's pretty. I didn't get one that you lock and had to have any kind of weather stripping or anything on it. It's a standard bin, and it seems to
Okay.
work fine.
All
And
right.
because you remember you've got a 4-inch pipe that, things go for the area of least resistance. That's why I have a 4-inch pipe, and that's why I kept the 4-inch pipe going up and out because it gives that area the fog gets out and into the pipes and starts to spread before it decides maybe I should go out the sides instead.
Okay. And then when we are placing our holes for the fan and for the air vent, is there a strategy, a best placement for those in relation to each other?
From what I can tell, what I did is I put the air vent above where I had the fogger and I put the fan on the other side. I put them equidistant from each other, so in thirds essentially. Although looking at a picture of it doesn't exactly in third. I just put one on each end and made sure that when I put it there, that I put it in the parts of the top. The top has a bunch of um, crevices in it, or it's not flat. It's sculpted. It just happened to be the one I found at Home Depot. It's on a lot of people's YouTube pages as well. So I figured it was a good one to use because others had, but not terribly far apart. But just so the fan wasn't blowing right onto the humidifier, and the mist could make it up, and the fan wasn't blowing straight into the outlet without getting to the mist. I
Okay.
hope that
And
makes sense
how
at
did
all.
you attach the fan and the vent to the top?
So I cut the hole a little bit smaller than the openings that was covering. I took silicone. I glued silicone all along the edges and I stuck it on there. And then I took 4 screws and I screwed it in on all 4 sides.
Okay.
So realistically, the silicone should hold, but the screws keep it in place to keep it from wobbling.
And then on the inside,
Mhm.
uh, how important is the water level? And what is it this mister and a float is how does that all work and what's important about the relationship between the water level and this mist head?
So you have to have so much water or
I'm
the
sorry, the fog head, the
right.
relationship between the float and the water and the fog head.
Right. So the ultrasonic fogger has to be so high up or it won't work. So what I did, the first thing I did is I had just threw it in there and I filled it up until it started whirring because it automatically turns off if it's too low. So I just filled it up to figure that out. And then I drew a line. And the next thing I did is I went all the way to the top and I found out how much it needs to really have to create fog. Because if you filled it all the way to the top, there'd be nowhere for the fog to go. It would get stuck and it would cause more problems. It would be more difficult. So I got a 4 or 5 inch area. It's probably about 4 or 5 inches where the fog is created, and there's 6 or 8 inches where the water is. And I know how low the bottom it can be, the lowest it could be, and I know how high the highest it could be. That's where I decided to put the float to make sure that you got enough water that I didn't fill it too much, and I just have to watch to make sure that it doesn't run out. And the only reason it would run out is if the water wasn't running to it.
Okay. How much space do we need above the fog head for this system to work?
That's a great question. I don't know the actual answer because I didn't prove it, but I found that it did that 4 or 5 inches is enough.
Okay. All right. And so
There's
you
nothing
have,
online that I could see. I couldn't find anything the manufacturer just said just enough. So I figure 4 or 5 inches is plenty.
all right. And so the fog discs, where do they call them? What's the official name? I keep calling them different things.
They call them discs. So
Disc. All
I
right.
don't know if there's another
I'm going to call it a
name for
fog
them.
disc.
Ultrasonic discs, ultrasonic fogger. So yeah.
And by the way, anybody, if I say misting, or any of that, please ignore that. It's supposed to be foggy. So okay. Uh, Now the fog heads, the discs,
Mhm.
fog discs, they
Mhm.
need to be a certain have access to a certain amount of water. How is it that they have access to that amount of water when the water level keeps decreasing and increasing, depending upon whether it's working and when you add water?
So the discs are sitting in a metal container, and the metal container is sitting on a float. So when the water goes down, the discs go down. When the water goes up, the disc goes up, and it keeps a certain pattern. It doesn't go high enough to float if you don't put enough water in it. That's the level where you have to have at least that much water or it shuts off automatically. And
Okay.
then you don't have everything working. So what I did was I took the bucket, I put the float on it, I put the ultrasonic fogger on top of that as it's supposed to be. I plugged it in and I put water into it until it started fogging. So I knew the level of how much it had to have in there to start fogging, and I marked that all around the container as the minimum level. And then I kept increasing it to see how much fog would happen until I saw there was about enough fog that I thought that it would be, 5 to 6 inches seemed like a reasonable amount of fog to be able to blow it with the fan. And that's where I
Okay.
set the level that I wanted to stay at most of the time.
How are we getting power to this fog disk sitting in the middle of the water inside an enclosed container?
So I cut a very small hole in the bottom, not the top of the container, where it goes out, where the cord goes out, and that's how it goes out. I didn't cut a hole through it. You could theoretically just cut a hole and put just silicone on it on the outside and make it waterproof. But I found it was just as long as I cut the bottom and not the lid, you're able to pull it through, and not enough fog of any significance comes out that way. The
Okay.
fan itself, the cord is on the outside,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
it doesn't matter.
Okay. So for
And your
the
fan is important. Your fan is on the outside of the top. It's sitting on the top. It's not in the container. It's on the outside of the container. So that way your cord is on the outside as well.
and you've got it so it's blowing in the
In,
container,
right.
right?
You need to blow in, right? Otherwise, you're
Okay.
blowing out the hole and not. You're literally pushing the air in to push the fog out.
Okay. So now we've got a system that's creating fog, and let's talk about how. Let's go over those details as to how you disperse it.
Okay. So it comes out a 4-inch hole. I've got the 4-inch pipe going up to my ceiling, and then I put a T. It's important if you can to not get a sanitary tee, because a sanitary tee is made for plumbing and it goes one direction and it'll push air more one way than the other. It's not absolute, but there's the regular tees look equal on both sides, the both of the parts of the top of the tee. A sanitary tee looks like it should be pushed in such a way that it's going to go down, because the T part, the bottom part of the tee, is actually supposed to be directed when you're using it, because these are plumbing parts that are usually used for toilets or what have you.
Okay. Now you do this a constant progression from a 4 inch down to a 2 inch, down to a 3/4 inch. Why are you doing that? And what is the strategy to implement that effectively?
One, you want to get the fog there, and you want to make sure that enough fog gets there. Two, you want to direct it and make sure that it's going in the right direction. Three, um, a eight, 10. They come in 10 foot. A 10 foot length of 4-inch pipe is like $100.
Mhm.
A 8 foot length of 2-inch pipe is like $30. So it would be tremendously expensive if I did it all in 4-inch. Plus, I would have to blow all that fog into all that pipe before it started to come out. So it was really a guessing game on my part based on what I kind of figured out and kind of knew and how much I thought I saw. I started with the 4-inch pipes. I put them out to the edges. I turned it on with the 4-inch pipes to see how much was blowing out each side, guessing about how much I needed. I went down to the 2-inch pipes because I knew that going down to a 3-inch pipe sounded silly to me. So I went down to the 2-inch pipes. I knew that the 2-inch pipes had a 3/4 inch um, end off you could tee off of. That's why I used it. So there's really no magic to it. It's what I could get at a reasonable price. And it had to go, you have to have some volume because if you went out 3/4, you wouldn't make it. The fog wouldn't, it would just kind of die down and it would kind of back up on itself. So you have to kind of have a system where you're going from bigger to smaller, but it doesn't have to be a great. So I've got 6 foot up, or no, 4 foot up because I put it off the ground. 4 foot up, 4 foot on either side of 4 inch down to 2 inch, 6 foot on each side, and then my 2 runs are 20 feet each. So the long sides are 20 foot. So it's 20 foot divided by the 4s, and the ends I have T's and caps, and so every 4 feet I broke down, and that's what I was able to do, and it seems to run very well.
All right, so let's talk about decision times. We go to House of Hydro, and there are a number of different fog heads that we can get. There's 6 disc, 12 disc. There's different sizes. How do we decide what we need?
I guess it depends on how much you have to spend. If you're on a tight budget, you get the smallest one that you think will reasonably do it. I got their biggest one, and I got a controller that allows me to turn it down to the smallest one and as
Okay.
big as the biggest one. And I figured it's supposed to put out 960 square feet of fog an hour. I figure even though my basement's a couple thousand square feet, I'm not going to fill the basement every hour with fog. So, and because I'm putting in pipes and it's piping out to the thing. So I figured that would do it. Um, it's only a couple $100 between their smallest and their most expensive. So I just kind of went the whole thing, and I'm hoping that it'll do my whole room. I'm going to see as time goes on. I'm building the system out in parts so that I can figure out, what point will it be when I've gotten too many pipes and too many distance. And I think based on what I've seen so far, I'm going to need two. Um, but um,
Okay.
but that's probably for 50 outlets or more. So
All right. So, how do you keep this entire system clean from the actual mist generation to all this entire network of pipes?
well, you've got to have it so just like plumbing, so that it drains down. So the highest point is the point where the 2-inch pipes hits the ceiling, and everything else goes downhill, either downhill into the cages or downhill back into the system, so that there is there's never a level area where it's going to sit and have water. So it's most likely going to dry itself out. Secondly, I've got the fan running longer than the mister. So once the mist stops, I've got a fan running, blowing
Mm.
air through it, so it's drying it out. Like I said, at some point I'm going to cut the 4-inch pipe and put a fan in there. The third thing is I didn't glue anything together. So because I didn't glue anything together, it can all be taken apart. Sometimes it's harder than others. If you leave it too long, over a period of time, it'll get stuck. But it's not glued, and you can actually get them apart. If you have to, you can heat or cool them, and the joints will separate themselves. Um, I've got a lot of construction experience. I work with my father since the time I was 12, maybe even as early as 9 on construction sites. I'm more than 50 now, so I've got a lot of experience with this kind of stuff. I've done plumbing, I've done electrical. So for me, it was relatively easy. I understand for some it might be more challenging, but if you're only doing a few cages, a single a humidifier like those ones we talked about before are good. If you're going to do something this big, then get help. Talk to other people. There's a ton of online stuff. There's a bunch of stuff on YouTube, on Instagram of people who did it themselves, and it shows you how they did it and kind of get a feel for it. And you got to play with it a little bit. You start with the system, you get the system, you put it where you think it's going to be. You start putting pieces on it, and you build it as big as you think you can. And then when it stop fogging as much as you want, then you know that you've built it too big, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let's officially talk about the pitfalls of automation. I know we've been touching on it all along here, but let's dive into it.
Sure. So number one, if things are happening when you're not watching them, you don't know that they're happening. So if you think you're fogging in the middle of the night and you're sleeping and you have your water automatically replaced, how do you know you fogged? Well, you can look and see, but a day or two. I keep enough humidity in my cages that a day or two, or the misters are enough to that started at 7 a.m. to make me not know if I fog. So you just got to know that you're fogging. You need to know that your timers are going off. You need to know that things need to be cleaned. When I'm doing a single cage with a single fogger, I'm taking it apart. I'm filling it up. The reservoir is getting dry because it dries out before I fill it up. I've cleaned it. I've done everything. I'm playing with it. The same thing with automation. If you're automating it, you still got to clean it. You still got to take care of it. You got to remember that you need to make sure that everything's going well.
Yeah, I would say automation is great because it allows us to defer the maintenance to our schedule. So the chameleon needs to be, say, misted every day. So instead of us having to mist them every day, we get an automatic mister, but we have to maintain that mister and check that mister. And so that maintenance and checks can be done on our time. So the mister and the fogging and all of this automation, it doesn't change how much effort we need to put into it and how much checking we need to put into it. It just allows us to do that on our selected time. So it doesn't take any effort away from you, anything that you have to do away from you. It just allows you to do it at your convenience.
Just like lights that that you have them turn them off and on automatically at the same time they do it, but you need to make sure the lights turn on. So sometime during the day you need to take a peek. Every couple days you need to take a look. Every week or so, or at the most every month, you need to use your UV meter to make sure that you're getting the right UVB. Make sure all your lights are not burned out. Make sure everything's working well. Yes, I think that the automation is awesome because it allows you more time to look at your chameleons, look at the cages, do things on your own time, but also do more. You can spend a little more time. I can spend more time feeding them, taking pictures while I'm doing stuff, rather than spending all the time filling up water jugs. I can turn on a thing. I still have to be there to make sure that it doesn't break. I mean, it was dripping at first, so until I could fix the drip, I had to turn it on and turn it off because once it filled up, it started to drip because the pressure was too much for my lines. I realized I just needed to use some tape, that plumber's tape, to make sure that, because the two different systems needed to be connected together, you just use plumbing tape that you'd use in any other plumbing thing. But that was knowledge that I had from years of doing plumbing. So, you just got to make sure everything's working well. And when you have more time, you can make sure things are working well, and you can spend more time playing with your chameleons and enjoying them, and less time working on them. Or it seems
Okay.
less like work, I guess you should say.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into the chat here. If anybody has any questions, go ahead, throw them in there. We're going to go back and we'll check to see what what people have written while we're talking. But go ahead and put any questions that you have or any discussion points. Here's one asking, how long have you found the discs to work for?
So I've only had the system completely working for 3 months. They say the discs last a year. They actually sent me a second set of discs, and you can replace the discs. They're not that expensive. So I'm hoping that they'll last a year. I'm going to, once every couple weeks, I'm going to turn it on and take a look and see how much it's fogging and making sure it's fogging the right amount. And like anything else, like any of the regular foggers, the discs look very similar to the bottoms of the foggers that I'm using. So it's going to get scale. It's going to get built up stuff on, even though I'm using RO water. You just got to keep an eye on it and replace them as needed. So I'm understanding it's a year. Everything I've heard is a year, but I can't actually say it from experience.
Okay. Is there a part you found to reduce fog on certain enclosures? So if you want to control individual enclosures.
Two ways of doing it. One, like the baby enclosures, I use 3/4 inch pipe, but I drill 1/4 inch holes. So you've got less fog coming up. As the smaller the hole, the smaller the tube that's getting there, the smaller the fog is going to be. Secondly, you could use a plumbing valve. They do have really nice plumbing valves. You have to make sure you get the right ones that are waterproof, and most of these things are for water. But you just turn it a little bit, and just like you would turn your spigot, you can reduce your fog. But individual cages to cage, you're not going to get a lot of control out of it. But there's also a large amount of leeway. It's not like if you fog one cage twice as much as the other that you're going to have a lot of trouble. Um, it's there's a lot of leeway to how much you can fog one cage versus another. And I have front screens, so almost all my cages are front complete screen, so it goes to the room as well. So as a whole, my room gets kind of foggy, and so they kind of share if you get a little bit more to one than the other. That's the nice thing about being hybrid rather than all glass, versus all screen, which then you can't control it at all.
Now, why do you choose to have screen front doors instead of acrylic?
Um, One, the acrylic seems to get dirty. Two, I tend to have enough humidity with the screen. I
Okay.
actually have half screen front doors, and I actually have some of the Dragon Strand ones with the full, almost all screen and just the bottom one. I'm finding that I need a fan with the ones that are acrylic to get more air movement.
Oh, okay.
I have moved them all to the end, and I've got a fan blowing over all those just to keep more movement. It seems to work well. But to me, it just seemed, but they still, with the three sides and the bottom solid, it seems to be enough. And my general humidity in my room helps out.
Okay. Well, where do you plan on taking this? As in, what's the next step in your experimenting with fogging?
I think the biggest thing is to first finish the system, get it to all my cages. I have two rows that I haven't done yet that I'm still going to figure out if I'm going to, the first time is I'm going to just, hopefully by the end of the day today, I'll have the other side done and make sure that the two sides work. If the fog isn't reduced and I can turn the fogger all the way up, or I don't have to turn on the fogger all the way up to get everything I need, then I'll add on to it. If not, I'll add another system to fog and end up with two fogging systems.
All right. Well, I think I've got a 6 disc head, so I'm gonna try. I'm gonna start off with a smaller system than you, but
Mhm.
smaller. I have a smaller room than you do,
Mhm.
so we'll see how that
I,
goes,
I
and
would
I'll
say
post that.
even thing that I was actually going to start with the 17 gallon, which is not much smaller. When you really look at it, because it drops the bottom, it gives you less leeway in the sense of um, the very bottom and the very top of the water level is going to be less. That's the only thing I'd watch out. Make sure that your top and bottom of your water level aren't so close that you don't have enough leeway unless you're using a float. And if you're going to use a float like that, then you do have to figure out some way to make sure it's working, rather than just what I'm doing is I'm coming in the morning, I'm turning it on, and I'm watching it to fill up. Once it's filled up, sometime during the rest of the day, I'm turning off the water, and then the next morning, I know it's actually worked.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that ends our discussion on fogging. Uh, Sean, I want to thank you very much for coming on and sharing your experience in building this monstrosity.
Absolutely, I will definitely be putting some pictures up and some videos on either Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, or all three of them, so people can kind of see what I'm doing. But you got to do it yourself. You got to see how you're doing it. You got to play around with it. You've got to be willing to do something and take the time and be wrong. We're experimenting in the chameleon community. We still don't know everything. We probably never will. But you got to just kind of build it as time goes on, and your system may be totally different than mine, because you may not be working in the basement, you may not be able to go to the ceiling, you may start from different areas, so just be willing to experiment.
I think that's great advice. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.